Karen slaps woman in wheelchair for being in her way. Crowd forces her to apologize publicly. The department store was a whirlwind of chaotic noise and motion, with fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow over towering racks of discounted clothes and bins overflowing with bargain electronics. It was the last day of a massive clearance sale, and word had spread like wildfire. People stormed the aisles with overflowing carts, some bickering over price tags, others bulldozing through racks like contestants in a game show. The air was thick with the scent of perfume testers and overheated air conditioning, and above it all, the shrill screech of intercom announcements tried to keep order but failed to stem the rising tide of tension. In the middle of this commercial battleground, Linda maneuvered her wheelchair carefully down a cramped aisle, her left hand guiding the joystick with calm precision, while her right hand gently steadied a small stack of towels she had placed in her lap. Her caregiver, Maya, hovered nearby with a shopping basket, making sure not to stray too far from Linda's side. The two moved slowly but purposefully, mindful of the crowd yet determined to finish their shopping in peace. Linda had always prided herself on her patience. Living with a spinal cord injury since her early 20s had taught her that the world rarely slowed down for anyone, and the best she could do was carve her own space within it. Today had been rougher than most, though. People shoved past her without apology, occasionally bumping her wheelchair or knocking items out of her reach. Maya did her best to keep her spirits up, cracking jokes and making snide observations about the madness around them, but even she looked rattled as the noise levels rose. They were just making their way past a display of discounted bedsheets when trouble entered the aisle in the form of a woman whose presence could be felt before she even spoke. Her hair was the kind of sharp, angular blonde bob that practically screamed confrontation. Her outfit, expensive athleisure paired with oversized sunglasses pushed atop her head, suggested someone who believed the rules didn't apply to her. The oversized tote on her shoulder knocked over a cardboard display as she swerved her cart into the aisle like a bulldozer, muttering about the jungle the store had become. Karen, as people would later identify her, locked eyes on Linda and immediately frowned. Her cart screeched to a halt just inches from the back of Linda's wheelchair. She stood there, arms crossed, tapping one toe in a rapid, impatient rhythm against the tile floor. "Excuse me," she snapped, her voice cutting through the surrounding chaos like a buzzsaw. "You're blocking the entire aisle. Some of us have places to be." Linda, who had just been reaching for a pack of pillowcases, turned her head with a polite, measured expression and said softly, "I'll be just a second. The aisle's a little narrow, but I'll move as soon as I can." Maya added quickly, "We're almost done here, ma'am. Thanks for your patience." But patience was the last thing on Karen's mind. She scoffed loudly and muttered something under her breath about people milking their disabilities and always needing special attention. Several nearby shoppers paused to glance over but quickly looked away, unsure whether to get involved. Linda's shoulders stiffened slightly, but she said nothing, instead moving a few inches forward to try to clear more space. But Karen wasn't interested in compromise. She pushed her cart aggressively, letting it scrape loudly against the metal shelves, then leaned forward, her voice rising. "This is ridiculous. You can't just sit here and hold everyone up. Move. Now." The temperature in the aisle seemed to drop. Linda opened her mouth to reply, but Karen didn't wait. She reached forward and slapped Linda's shoulder, not a tap, not a push, but a clear, audible slap that echoed louder than it should have in a place packed with people. Linda let out a shocked gasp, and Maya froze mid-step, eyes wide in disbelief. "Did you just hit her?" Maya shouted, her voice trembling with fury. "You laid hands on her. Are you serious right now?" Karen took a step back, looking momentarily stunned herself, as if surprised by her own reaction. Then her defensiveness kicked in and she folded her arms. "She's exaggerating. I barely touched her. Maybe if she moved faster, I wouldn't have to do anything at all." The surrounding shoppers, who until now had remained distant observers, began to murmur. One teenager in a hoodie raised his phone and started recording. A middle-aged woman pulled out her own phone, her eyes flashing with disgust. A man from the electronics section poked his head into the aisle, attracted by the commotion. "She hit her," someone whispered. That woman in the chair, she slapped her. More phones came out. Karen suddenly found herself facing not one or two annoyed looks, but a circle of judgmental eyes and raised eyebrows. She turned to leave, but her path was blocked by a young man holding a laundry basket full of discounted bedsheets, who raised one hand and said calmly, "You're not going anywhere." Linda, still visibly shaken but regaining her composure, spoke up. "I didn't do anything to deserve that," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I just wanted to shop like everyone else." Karen rolled her eyes and tried to push her cart past the growing crowd, but another shopper stepped into her path. "You assaulted her," the woman said firmly. "That's not something you get to walk away from." Karen's face twisted with indignation. "Are you people serious? You're defending her just because she's in a wheelchair. I'm the one being harassed now." "No," Maya said coldly, standing between Karen and Linda. "You're being held accountable." The tension reached a boiling point. More people crowded in, blocking every exit. The air felt electric, thick with outrage and disbelief. The phones continued recording. Karen's gaze darted from face to face, realizing for the first time that she was completely outnumbered and that her usual tactics of intimidation and outrage were not going to work here. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. They were judging, recording, and preparing to act. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, Linda sat still, not with fear, but with quiet resolve, her hand resting gently on the armrest of her chair as Maya stood protectively beside her, ready to make sure the story didn't end with silence. The moment froze in a way that felt almost unreal, as if time itself hesitated, stunned by what had just unfolded. Karen, standing in the narrow aisle of the clearance-crammed department store, looked around at the tightening ring of faces surrounding her, each one a mirror of disbelief, anger, and growing resolve. Her shoulders tensed, and for a fleeting second she seemed to grasp that she was no longer in control, no longer backed by the passive indifference that so often let her kind of behavior slide. The illusion of being untouchable was crumbling beneath the weight of so many staring eyes and silently recording phones. Yet even as the reality of the situation bore down on her, she fought it with the only tools she knew: deflection, arrogance, and an unwavering belief in her own superiority. "This is harassment," she barked, her voice brittle and rising in pitch. "All of you ganging up on one person. What happened to personal space, huh? You're treating me like some kind of criminal." Nobody moved. A heavy silence pressed down over the aisle, the kind that comes before a reckoning. It was broken not by yelling or threats, but by the calm, deliberate voice of a man standing just to Karen's left. He was in his mid-30s, well-dressed in a navy button-up, holding a phone in one hand and a child's winter coat in the other. "You slapped a woman who uses a wheelchair," he said, not loudly but with a certainty that landed harder than any shout. "We all saw it. We all heard it. There's video." Karen opened her mouth, searching for a response, something sharp to regain the high ground, but words failed her. In place of her usual righteous fury was a sputtering denial that lacked its usual conviction. "I didn't slap her," she muttered weakly. "It wasn't like that. She wouldn't move." Another voice piped up, this one from the teenager who had started recording earlier. "You literally called her lazy and said she should stay home. You slapped her because you were annoyed. That's assault, lady, and now it's all on camera." He turned his phone screen around, playing back the footage for the few people closest to him. The slap echoed from the tiny speaker, jarring in its violence. Linda's startled reaction followed. A collective murmur swept through the group. Karen's face flushed deep red, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to deny it, but couldn't find a single angle that would make her look like anything other than the aggressor. Maya stepped closer, her hands clenched at her sides, her voice trembling with restraint. "You put your hands on her," she said, her eyes fixed on Karen's. "You didn't just yell or make a scene. You assaulted someone with a disability who couldn't even defend herself. And you think you're the victim here." She motioned toward Linda, who sat silently but upright, her hands folded in her lap, her expression a mixture of pain and dignity. "Do you know how often people like Linda get treated like they're invisible or in the way? She spent her whole life learning how to stay calm while people ignore her or walk around her like she's furniture. And today, in front of all these people, You reminded her exactly how cruel strangers can be. Karen took a step back, but there was nowhere to go. Another shopper, an older woman with short gray hair and a firm stance, moved slightly, blocking her retreat. "You're not leaving until you make this right," she said simply. "This isn't going to be another one of those situations where someone like you walks away and the person you hurt gets left behind to pick up the pieces." Karen's expression hardened, her eyes darting around as if searching for some sympathetic face in the crowd, but all she found were more cameras, more judgment, and no allies. "I didn't mean to hit her," she said finally, the words coming out stiff and awkward. "I was just frustrated. It's not like I punched her." The man with the child's coat stepped forward again. "Intent doesn't erase harm," he said, "and minimizing it doesn't make it better. You hit her because you lost your temper and thought no one would hold you accountable. Well, guess what? Today you're not getting away with it." Karen looked down, suddenly realizing her hands were shaking. Her bravado was fading, cracked by the overwhelming pressure of being truly, undeniably wrong. She turned toward Linda, perhaps for the first time actually seeing her as a person and not just an obstacle. But instead of an apology, her lips twisted into something else, a tired, self-pitying scowl. "You don't know what kind of day I've had," she muttered. "You think I'm just some monster who walks around hitting people for fun." A new voice joined the conversation, this one coming from the rear of the group, slow and thoughtful. A tall man in a denim jacket with a calm demeanor and a voice like gravel stepped through the crowd. "We don't care about your day," he said plainly, "because nothing that happened to you justifies what you did to her. And the more you make excuses, the worse this is gonna look for you. If you're smart, you'll take a breath, shut up, and do the right thing before this ends up all over the internet." His words were met with a ripple of nods. Someone added, "Too late for that, it's already uploading." Karen looked stricken, truly cornered now, her body rigid with panic. Linda, who had remained composed throughout the confrontation, finally spoke again, her voice quiet but steady. "You don't have to explain anything to me," she said to Karen. "You don't have to justify why you did it, but you did do it, and you can't take that back. What you can do is be honest about it, own it. Not for me, for yourself." The air shifted. Even Maya looked surprised by the softness in Linda's tone. But the message landed hard, striking Karen in a place that none of the crowd's anger had been able to reach. Her mouth trembled, but no words came. She stood in silence, surrounded by strangers who were no longer just passive observers. They had become witnesses to a public moral line being drawn in real time. Finally, one of the store employees arrived, a young woman in a red vest, looking overwhelmed but alert. She took in the scene, saw Linda, saw Karen, saw the sea of phones, and wisely said nothing except, "Is anyone hurt? Do I need to call security?" Maya stepped forward, gesturing toward Karen. "She assaulted my friend, but we're not calling the cops. Yet, she still has a chance to do the right thing." The employee nodded uncertainly and pulled out a walkie-talkie, stepping aside to wait. All eyes returned to Karen, whose face had gone pale beneath the cosmetic blush. The silence wrapped tighter around her. The choice was clear: apologize or watch her life explode in a matter of hours, and everyone was waiting. Karen stood rigid and frozen, her hands twitching at her sides as the weight of everyone's eyes bore down on her with suffocating force. The sting of shame crawled over her skin like fire ants, not just from the videos that had already started uploading to social media, but from the crowd's silent refusal to accept anything less than accountability. She had never felt so utterly exposed, so stripped of the performative self-righteousness that had carried her through so many smaller conflicts before. Normally, in moments like these, she could raise her voice, weaponize her privilege, claim victimhood with enough theatrical energy to spin reality in her favor. But now, there was no escaping the evidence. The slap echoed again in her ears, louder now than it had been in the moment, more violent, more real. She had struck a woman who couldn't even stand up to defend herself, in front of dozens of witnesses, and she knew, without anyone having to say it, that whatever happened next would ripple far beyond the fluorescent aisles of this store. Linda remained seated in quiet dignity, her fingers laced tightly in her lap, eyes not full of rage or vengeance, but a weariness that spoke to a lifetime of being belittled, overlooked, and underestimated. Her calm had only made Karen look worse by comparison, a juxtaposition the crowd had picked up on almost instinctively. Next to her, Maya was barely containing her fury, eyes fixed on Karen like a blade sharpened by injustice. Behind them, the recording phones hovered like specters, evidence, judgment, and the internet's insatiable hunger for drama, all rolled into one. Karen's breath came in shallow gasps, her mascara-lined eyes darting to every exit, every possible path away from this public tribunal, but no one budged. Her attempt to step backward was immediately blocked by a woman holding a pair of children's sneakers and a toddler strapped to her chest. The mother didn't say a word, just narrowed her eyes, shook her head, and tightened the space behind Karen even more. The lawyer-looking man who had spoken earlier stepped forward once again, now holding up his own phone, which displayed the local police department's number ready to be dialed. "You've got one option left," he said, his tone factual, not threatening. "You apologize publicly and sincerely right now, or we make sure every platform sees this. And then we call the cops. They're not going to ignore this kind of video evidence. You won't get away with just walking out and pretending it didn't happen." Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again, her throat working like she was swallowing glass. Her voice, when it finally came, cracked under the pressure. I didn't mean for it to go that far," she muttered, but there was no conviction in it, no courage. I got overwhelmed. This place was loud and crowded in. She was in the way, and the crowd stirred restlessly at the attempt to justify herself again, a few voices interrupting with sharp retorts. "Still blaming her," someone barked. "You think stress gives you the right to hit someone," another added, incredulous. Maya took a step forward, and her voice rang out like a gavel dropping in a courtroom. "You don't get to make excuses. You don't get to rewrite what happened just because you're embarrassed. You assaulted my friend. You put your hands on her because you didn't want to wait 5 seconds for a human being to move. And now you're being asked, not forced, just asked, to take responsibility." Karen's jaw trembled, the tears that had been building finally spilling over. But they were not the tears of a person wounded by empathy or remorse. They were the frantic tears of someone who saw her mask cracking, her social armor disintegrating in front of strangers who no longer played along with her narrative. She reached for her tote bag, then paused as the denim jacket man shifted slightly, blocking her again with nothing more than his presence. "Don't try to run," he said quietly. "It's already too late for that." For the first time, Karen truly broke. Her legs wobbled and she collapsed against a shelf of discount bath mats, her knees buckling as the emotional fallout hit like a truck. Her voice came out in a choked whimper. Fine, I'm sorry, okay? I shouldn't have touched her, I shouldn't have said what I said, it was wrong." The apology, though desperate and half-choked, was at least audible, and a few of the cameras angled to catch it. But the atmosphere didn't ease. Linda hadn't moved. Maya's eyes didn't soften. The crowd didn't shift. It wasn't enough. Not yet. One of the teenagers recording finally spoke up, this time addressing Karen directly. "Say it to her, not us. Say it to the woman you slapped like she was an obstacle." Karen slowly turned her face toward Linda, who was now watching her with the kind of quiet, commanding presence that made Karen feel even smaller. She drew a shaky breath, brushed her damp hair back from her face, and spoke directly to Linda. "I'm sorry for hitting you," she said, barely above a whisper. "It was wrong, and I was completely out of line. You didn't deserve that. I was angry, but that's no excuse. I was wrong." Linda looked at her for a long, silent moment and then gave a single slow nod. She didn't smile. She didn't say, "I forgive you." She simply nodded. That nod carried more weight than a dozen dramatic forgiveness arcs. It was an acknowledgement of truth spoken too late, an affirmation that what had been done was now on record, and so was the response. The tension in the aisle shifted just slightly, like air escaping a pressure valve. Some people lowered their phones. Others kept recording just in case. Maya stepped closer to Linda and gently rested a hand on her shoulder, a silent message of solidarity. The store employee who had been lingering near the end of the aisle finally stepped forward again, her walkie-talkie still clutched in one hand. "I've got a manager on their way," she said. "They'll want statements, Security's coming too, we'll take it from here. Karen's head dropped. Her shoulders sagged in defeat. Whatever was coming next, whether it was being escorted out banned or simply having her face plastered online, it was out of her hands now. She stood there quietly, trembling, as the crowd slowly began to thin, people moving aside for the staff now taking over. Maya leaned down toward Linda and whispered something. Linda gave her a small nod and they began to back away slowly, Maya clearing a gentle path for the wheelchair to reverse out of the aisle. The people around them moved aside with respect, several even offering quiet words of support. "You handled that with grace," one woman said. "You didn't deserve any of that," another murmured. Linda acknowledged them with tired but grateful eyes, her body weary but her spirit grounded. She had been humiliated, yes, but not alone. And in a world where silence often won, today the crowd had chosen to speak. The tension in the department store did not fully dissipate even as Linda and Maya began to move away from the aisle where everything had unfolded. Though the immediate pressure had eased, a strange, almost electric awareness still lingered in the air. Like everyone in that part of the store knew they had just witnessed something significant, something that hovered between justice and tragedy. People spoke in hushed tones now, some tucking their phones away, others still quietly reviewing the footage they'd captured. There was no cheering, no clapping, no victorious celebration, just the heavy weight of reality. Karen had been forced to apologize, yes, and she had broken down enough to admit what she'd done, but the damage wasn't undone. Linda still had a faint red mark on her shoulder where the slap had landed. Maya still carried the rigid fury of a protector who had been forced to witness someone she loved being violated in public. And Karen, slumped against a shelf with her mascara smudged and her tote sliding from her shoulder, looked like a woman unraveling under the weight of long-overdue accountability. As they made their way through the store, Linda remained silent, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes focused straight ahead. The noise of the crowd around them had softened, yet her thoughts were loud. She wasn't reliving the slap itself. Her body had absorbed the shock, the pain, and the humiliation, but rather the moment immediately afterward, the silence, the judgment, the power of strangers who had chosen to stand with her instead of looking away. That was what kept looping in her head. Not the assault, but the resistance, the refusal. She hadn't cried, though the sting in her shoulder still throbbed faintly, not because it didn't hurt, but because she'd felt something stronger than pain. For once, people had seen her, not as a chair, not as a traffic obstacle, not as someone to pity or ignore. They had seen her as a human being. That meant more than she could explain. Maya guided the wheelchair gently through the wider paths near the home goods section, her movements careful, but her jaw still clenched tight. She hadn't said much since they left the aisle, and Linda could feel the storm still brewing in her. Maya had always been fiercely protective. Even before Linda's accident, they'd been friends since college, with a bond that had only grown deeper over the years. When Linda had lost the use of her legs after the spinal injury, Maya hadn't walked away like so many others had. She doubled down. She learned how to care, how to advocate, how to fight battles Linda didn't always have the energy for. And right now, she was vibrating with all the things she still wanted to scream. "You okay?" Maya finally asked, her voice low, almost hoarse. Linda glanced up and gave her a nod. Physically, yeah, she hesitated, then added emotionally, "I don't know, numb maybe, angry too, but weirdly proud." Maya stopped walking and turned to her, confused. "Proud?" Linda looked back toward the aisle, now mostly obscured by shelves and hanging clearance signs. "Because no one walked away," she said. "No one pretended it didn't happen. That doesn't happen often. Usually I just get to eat the disrespect in silence, but not this time." Maya sighed and knelt beside her, eye level now, her expression softening. "You didn't deserve any of that. You were just trying to shop just like everyone else. And that woman, she couldn't even look at you like a human being. She looked at you like a speed bump." "I've been looked at worse," Linda said with a tired smile. "But you're right, this one was different." They sat like that for a moment, just breathing, letting the intensity of the moment pass. Shoppers continued to buzz around them, carts clattering, overhead announcements blaring indistinct messages about special deals and register availability, but it all felt distant, like background noise to something much larger. Eventually, Maya rose to her feet, brushing her jeans, and said, "Let's just check out and get the hell out of here. I'm done pretending this is a normal Saturday." At the checkout line, the cashier, a young woman with dyed blue hair and a nervous demeanor, instantly recognized Linda. Her eyes widened and she offered a small, sympathetic smile. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly, scanning items at half speed. "I saw what happened on someone's phone just now. That was horrible." Linda nodded, not eager to discuss it but also too polite to ignore the concern. "I'm okay, just want to get home." The cashier leaned in slightly and said, "You're really brave. That lady was crazy, but you kept your cool the whole time. Just thank you for standing your ground." Maya glanced at Linda and offered a knowing smirk. "See, you're going viral for all the right reasons." Linda rolled her eyes but couldn't hide the hint of a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. After paying, they began the slow trek back to the parking lot, the store's automatic doors parting with a hiss as they stepped out into the fresh afternoon air. The sun was still high, casting long shadows on the pavement, and cars moved sluggishly through the lot, some still circling for spots. Maya unlocked the car and began loading the few bags into the trunk, then returned to help Linda transfer from the chair into the passenger seat. Their movements were practiced and quiet, like a choreographed routine built on years of trust. As Maya folded the wheelchair and loaded it into the back, Linda stared out the window, watching a few shoppers exit the store and glancing down at their phones. She wondered what the video looked like from the outside. Would people see her as helpless, as heroic, as tragic? She didn't want any of those labels. She just wanted to be someone who had the right to shop without being attacked, someone whose pain mattered, someone who deserved space not in spite of her chair but regardless of it. As Maya slid into the driver's seat, she handed Linda her phone. "You're already on Twitter, 3 different angles, over 100,000 views between them." Linda blinked, stunned. "That fast?" Maya nodded. "Yep, hashtag's already trending. People are calling her Clearance Cairn." Linda groaned, half amused, half mortified. "Great, I'm a meme now." "Maybe," Maya said, starting the engine. "But you're a meme with backbone and you didn't let her break you." Linda turned her head and watched the store shrink behind them as they pulled away. Maybe that was the most important thing. Not the slap, not the apology, but the fact that when someone tried to reduce her to nothing, the world, just this once, refused to let her disappear. The drive home was unusually quiet, not out of discomfort but from a shared exhaustion that seemed to settle into every corner of the car. The adrenaline had long since burned itself out, leaving Linda and Maya in that odd in-between space where everything felt both too loud and eerily still. The radio played softly in the background, some mellow tune that neither of them really registered, and outside the window, the world rolled by in a blur of traffic lights and pedestrians, and people who hadn't just lived through a viral confrontation. The afternoon sun slanted through the windshield, casting warm streaks across Linda's knees as she sat with her hands resting in her lap, scrolling absent-mindedly through her phone. Notifications were coming in at an overwhelming pace. Likes, retweets, messages from people she didn't know offering support, praising her composure, denouncing Cairn. There were memes already, screenshots with captions, some funny, others filled with righteous outrage. Someone had even clipped her exact words during Cairn's apology and set them to inspirational background music. The virality was surreal, almost absurd. Just hours ago, she'd been looking at pillowcases, and now the internet was hailing her as a symbol of quiet resistance. Maya glanced over at her at a red light, one hand on the steering wheel and the other gripping a half-empty bottle of iced tea. "You doing okay with all that?" she asked, tilting her chin toward the phone. "Feels like a lot." Linda nodded slowly, not taking her eyes off the screen. "It is, but weirdly, it's not the worst thing. I think I'd feel worse if no one cared, if it all just happened and everyone looked away." She set the phone in her lap and looked out the window. "It's weird to think I had to get slapped to be seen," But I guess, maybe people are ready to see more now, not just me, all of us. Maya exhaled, a long breath that had been stuck somewhere deep in her chest. You've always deserved to be seen. I just wish the world didn't need viral footage to wake up. By the time they reached the apartment complex, the sky had begun to shift into that golden hour glow, painting everything with soft oranges and long shadows. The quiet hum of distant lawnmowers and birdsong filled the background as Maya helped Linda out of the car and back into her wheelchair. It was a familiar rhythm, one they had repeated countless times, but today it felt heavier somehow, like they were returning from a battlefield rather than a clearance sale. As they made their way up the ramp toward Linda's unit, neighbors peeked out of windows or waved cautiously from their doors, some clearly aware of what had happened. News traveled fast, especially when it was splashed across every social media platform with captions like, "Entitled woman slaps disabled shopper, gets instant karma." Inside the apartment, everything felt normal, which made the contrast even more jarring. The furniture was the same. The smell of lavender from a nearby diffuser still floated through the air, and Linda's cat, Machi, sauntered out from beneath the couch like nothing had changed. Yet everything had changed, in ways Linda couldn't fully articulate. She wheeled herself toward the window while Maya disappeared into the kitchen to make tea, her mind still spinning with the day's events. She thought about the crowd, how they had rallied, not in anger alone but in defense, in solidarity. She thought about Karen's face, the cracks in her mask of arrogance, the way shame had finally overtaken her entitlement. And she thought about her own voice, rising in that moment, not loud but clear, strong enough to be heard through the noise. Her phone vibrated again. Another message, this time from a reporter requesting an interview. Linda sighed and turned the phone face down. She didn't want to be a symbol right now. She just wanted to be herself, to sit in her home with her best friend and her cat and feel safe. She rolled back toward the kitchen, where Maya was pouring boiling water into two mismatched mugs. Maya looked up and handed one over, her eyes searching Linda's face for signs of collapse, of delayed reaction, but found only weariness and resolve. "You don't have to talk to anyone if you don't want to," Maya said gently. "Not the reporters, not social media. You don't owe anyone your trauma just because it went viral." Linda nodded and took a sip of tea, the warmth grounding her. "I know, but maybe I'll talk about it on my terms. Later. Right now, I just need to be here." They settled onto the couch, Machi curling up between them like a living cushion, purring softly. The news played in the background, but neither of them was really watching. They sat in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that only comes between people who don't need to fill space with words. Eventually, Maya said, "Do you think she meant it? The apology?" Linda stared into her mug for a moment, considering. "I think she meant it as much as someone like her could. Maybe not from empathy, but from fear. From the realization that the world wasn't going to let her get away with it this time." She paused, then added, "That's enough for me. Not because it fixes what happened, but because it means she was held accountable, even just a little. And maybe next time she'll think twice." The evening wore on, the light dimming, the sounds of the world outside softening. Linda opened her phone one last time, checked a few messages, and finally posted something on her account. A simple, quiet statement. "Disability doesn't mean invisibility. I didn't expect to go viral, but I'm grateful for the strangers who stood up when it counted. Thank you, be kind, see each other." She set the phone down again and leaned back, letting the words settle in her chest. That was the story she wanted to tell. Not one of victimhood, not one centered on the slap or the outrage, but on the humanity that rose up in response. In the end, it wasn't the apology that mattered most. It wasn't the trending hashtags or the thousands of comments. It was the moment when strangers became allies, when silence was broken by collective refusal to accept cruelty as normal. That day in the store could have been just another painful memory, another injustice swallowed and carried alone. But it was. It became a testament to what's possible when people choose to see, to speak, and to stand. And for Linda, that meant everything.